Welcome to our second Voices of History Roundtable discussion. In December of this year, we'll commemorate the 75th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor that propelled the United States into World War II. Today we're going to hear from three veterans of World War II who are going to tell us firsthand accounts of what it was like to fight in that war. There were 16 million U.S. servicemen in the war, and only 855,000 remain today. So enjoy the aspects of history that we get to hear today. So we'll start off, we'll have our guys introduce themselves, tell us their name, their family, where they're from, and that kind of thing, so we get to know who they are. So first we'll start with Ralph Hain.
Hi, I'm Ralph Hain. I live on East 3rd Street here in Delphus. Formerly from Otterville, and that's about it. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any family here with you today?
Oh yeah, I have my wife Alice, my son Ed, and several my daughter Nancy, and I have some cousins I see, and my granddaughter Chanda, and that's about all I know.
Okay. Good-looking family and friends here today. Okay.
Got a lot of friends here there.
That's great. That's great. Okay, now we'll pass the...
My brother Jerry is here too, in the back.
Okay. Very good.
All right.
Okay. All right, our next panelist today is Keith Bastian. If you'd like to just tell us about yourself and where you're from and who's with you here today.
My name is Keith Bastian. I've been a Delphus resident for a little over 3 years now. My wife passed away 9 years ago. And I came to live in Delphus to be with my son and his wife, so they kind of keep a watch over me. And I've been retired since 1985, almost longer than I've worked, and that's I'm able to live that long, and I'm glad for that.
Okay, very good. Okay, thanks, Keith. Now we'll go down to Dr. Earl Morris. I'd like to introduce himself and tell us about him.
And I am Dr. Earl Morris, born in Leipzig, Ohio, October the 25th, 1924. Graduated from Leipzig High School. Had a short time being occupied with driving tanks at the Lima Tank Depot from June when I graduated until September the 17th when I was inducted into the Navy. I have, there's a number of really, really good acquaintances here today. My neighbor, I see Carla is here, Jeannie Best, my brother and his wife. Yeah. Yeah. My son and his wife. I was looking for my wife. Hold up your hand, Marge. That's about it.
Okay. All right, thanks, guys. Sounds like we have a lot of friends and family here today to hear your stories. We'll start out first. We'll just go down the line with the questions we have. But first of all, what were you doing before the war? Were you working? Were you in school? And what were people in the area thinking about the war before the United States got involved? What were the thoughts here about worldwide problems then?
Oh, I worked at the Otterville hatchery in Otterville, and I was a chicken caller at the time. Before that, he had sent me to school in St. Louis to learn to call chickens, and so I worked for him. And other than people at home where everybody was going into the Army, everybody felt like they ought to go in the Army.
Did people feel that the U.S. would eventually be involved in the war at that time?
Well, no, not right then, no. I enlisted in October of '42, but I didn't go in until February of '43 into pilot's training. I'd taken a test at Fort Wayne for an aviation cadet, and the rest of the time was spent either going to school or flying in Europe. So.
Okay.
Okay.
Keith, how about you? What were you doing before the war, and what were the thoughts that you had about the war and U.S. involvement in the war?
Oh, I was a farm boy. I was raised about 7 miles west of Lima, and I graduated from Elida High School. And when I graduated, I was 17, going on 18, and I got a work job at the tank depot, putting radios in tanks. And then came November, and I didn't want to get drafted, so I decided to join the Navy, and that's the best thing I ever did. I went to boot camp for about 7 weeks. Then after that, I wanted to go to trade school and be a radioman, but they said my mechanical aptitude was too much for that, and they made me a torpedoman. So I went to torpedo school for 16 weeks, and that was in summer of '44. In about July, I guess it must have been, we went to Norfolk, and that's when I got into destroyer training. All kinds of things to be done on a destroyer in case you're in an emergency, you have to help on something else other than torpedoes. And at the end of that destroyer training, about middle of July, we went down to Chickasaw, Alabama, and we got a brand new destroyer. It was commissioned on August the 2nd. My mother and my future wife came down to see me there and see the commissioning and tour the ship. And from there, it was shakedown cruises and living on the destroyer for over 20 months.
So before you went into the service, and what were your thoughts about the war? What was the general attitude of the population about the war in Europe? Did you think we would ever get involved with it, or not?
Oh, it was no question about it. My father had been in World War I. He served in France in the 50th Aerial Squadron. And as I was growing up, I always had military in the background. And as I say, I wanted to get in the Navy, and I was glad I made that move.
Okay, well, we'll hear some more of your stories here coming up. Dr. Morris, what were you doing before the war, and what were your thoughts on what was going on in Europe?
After you got to be about 4 years old or 5 years old, having been raised on a farm, if your hands could fit around a hoe handle, you went to work. And that's the way it was on the farm. Everybody had to work. When we was juniors in high school, the war was at its peak almost at that time. My brother and I and 7 of our classmates decided it was time to put an end to that mess going on. And we left school, went to Ottawa to the Marine recruiting station. Best advice that we ever had in our life was that sergeant stood up and with his finger, he said, "We'd like to have you guys, but he said you get back to school and get your education and then come back and see me." And we did. Very good advice. Junior year in summer camp, we helped asphalt Route 25 from Findlay to Lima. That was nice work. A little warm.
So when you went to the recruiting office as juniors, did you have to be a certain age to join the Army or to be enlisted?
Well, you were supposed to be, but we were all 18
Okay.
at that time, and we were still 18 when we graduated. And that's when I went to work for the Lima Depot, or for the Lima Tank Depot, of course. One of the things that really troubled us was not being able to discuss or tell them what you would like to do. They told you what to do all the time. That was we were kind of used to that from being on the farm. But that was about it.
Okay. Okay. If you want to hold your microphone just a little up, it's shaking a little bit. There you go. Perfect.
Close. Yes.
Okay. Do you guys remember when Pearl Harbor was attacked? How did you hear about that, and what were your thoughts when you heard that right away? I mean, did you know where Pearl Harbor was? A lot of people didn't. But when did you hear that, and what did you think?
Well, I was out in the Painted Desert out in Mexico or New Mexico, I'm not sure where. And there were 7 of us that were driving 41 Buicks to California from Bryan, Ohio. We were paid $50 and had to buy the gas. And we took another Buick along with us to bring us back home. Anyhow, I think we made about $10 on that deal. Anyhow, it took us like 4 or 5 days, I'm not sure. But we were driving along, and I had the radio on, and I heard Pearl Harbor was attacked, and I pulled up beside of the one guy and says, I put up 7 fingers. It was on 70. I wanted him to get the radio. Well, he thought he wanted to go 70 miles an hour. he goes and rode out, and I said, "No, your radio." And so we sat there and listened to it, and then people were really scared out there at that time. The time we got to California, everybody wanted to know what we were doing, and says we're going to go out to California and enlist. Well, they wanted to buy us drinks and all that, but we didn't. We delivered the cars and got home, and that's how I found out.
Okay. Keith, how did you find out about Pearl Harbor being attacked, and what did you think?
I can remember standing in the living room in my parents' home and hearing that come over the radio. And it's almost like a switch came on, and it said something what my course was going to be.
Hold your microphone a little closer.
All I can really recall about it, and I didn't have any particular thoughts about it at that time, was we were preparing to go to church, and we heard it on the radio, and no significance at that time what was really happening.
Okay. Okay, for each of you, did you enlist in the military or were you drafted? And if you enlisted, why did you enlist? And tell me about the whole enlistment process, the whole draft process. How did that happen for guys your age?
Well, for me, I had graduated in '39 from Ottoville High School, and we knew about the aviation cadet system, and I wanted to fly. anyhow, I went to Fort Wayne, and there was two of us went to take the test, and he didn't pass, and I did, and so I was sworn in and called in February. So I had from October to February before they called me. So.
Okay. Now, the test that you took, that was to join the Army or the military? Or to join the
No,
flying corps?
That was a test with all kind of questions.
Okay, okay.
I don't remember.
So were there a lot of guys taking the test at that time? It was,
You know, I can't remember about that.
Okay.
either.
okay. How about you, Keith? You think you said you enlisted?
Yes. As I said before, I'd worked at the tank depot, and until I got close to my 18th birthday, my dad took me up to the post office in Lima, down at the basement where the recruiting station was, and signed me up. And a week after that, I was on my way up to Toledo and getting into uniform and so forth for the Navy.
So you chose the Navy as when you were enlisted? Or when you enlisted, or how did that happen?
No, I wanted the Navy.
Okay, okay.
My father was in the Army, but I wanted to be in the Navy.
So if you enlisted, you could kind of pick which service you wanted to be in?
Which service?
Yeah, if you enlisted instead of being drafted, could you pick the service that you wanted to be in instead of them telling you?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
okay.
that's what I wanted. I wanted to be in the Navy.
Okay. Okay. How about you, Earl? What was your enlistment or drafting like?
We're just notified by mail to be at Ottawa at a certain place for a physical examination. And from there, we were directed to go to Toledo to a base there. And there was, we must have had 150 in that room going through final examinations and determining where you were going to go in the service portion. And as I remember, we were in line about 20 back from the officers' desks that were doing all this. And we watched what they were doing. And as the young men stepped up to the desk, you'd say, "What part of the military do you want to be in?" If they said Navy, they stamped it Army. And the next one came up and they asked him, and he said, well, he'd like to be in the Army. They stamped it Marines. And there was 3 of them doing this along the way. And when we got there, we knew where we wanted to go. We wanted to go in the Navy. So my brother was first in line, and the officer looked up and said, what military part do you want to go in? And he said Army. They stamped him Navy. I'm next, and I'm really fearful that they just did the last one like that. I said, what do you want to go in? I said, Army, Navy. And from there, I think it was about 2 weeks that we went to boot camp at Great Lakes.
Okay.
So,
Okay, yeah, pretty interesting. Okay, tell me about the day that you left for the military. What thoughts were going through your mind? What thoughts were going through your family's mind? Where did you leave from? How did you get there? Just that whole experience of that day of leaving home, going into the service.
Golly, I don't know. Mom and Dad took me. It was someplace in Indiana. I'm not even sure. But it was tough saying goodbye. And that's about it, I guess.
So did you leave with a lot of other guys from
There was
Roundtable or
always,
close
Oh,
town?
that's right. I went to Columbus. I don't know really where I left from. Anyhow, we went to Columbus, and there was about a dozen of us maybe.
Okay.
And then we took the bus, or they took us to the next place. So,
Okay. Where was your boot camp located?
well, I went, when I went to 3 months at San Antonio was my boot camp, and The every place I went was 3 months. In all my training, I had maybe a dozen bases that I went through to time I had a crew and all that, and it was always 3 months. So that's how my Army time was spent.
Other than your trip to California with the cars, had you been very far from home before you left for training?
Well, I've been to California a couple of times, and I traveled quite a bit. Not so much then, I guess. I was pretty young. But it was quite a trip, all in all. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, Keith, how about you? Where did you leave for basic training? What thoughts were going through your mind? What was your family thinking that day? And what was your experience like when you finally left for the military?
I left about 10 days after my birthday. We took a bus up to Toledo and joined the Navy there. And from there, we stayed overnight, and then they sent us up to Great Lakes. And that's where I spent 7 weeks in boot camp and 16 weeks in torpedo school.
Where was Great Lakes located? What part of, was it in Michigan or where?
No, it's Great Lakes is near Chicago.
Okay. So what thoughts were going through your mind as you left, and what was your mom thinking? And
Well, I was looking for a real change. In growing up, I'd never gotten out of the state of Ohio except to go to Indiana to visit my dad's mother, or dad's wife, dad's sister. But this is the beginning of an awful great adventure.
okay, how about you, Earl? What was your day when you left for basic training like?
We were notified where to be at Great Lakes. So we had train tickets from Deschler, Ohio to Chicago, transferred to an A train that went out to Great Lakes. We were there. We learned early on not to volunteer for anything. One of the things that they ask us at boot camp, if I think it was
Hey, Earl?
driving a truck. Could you drive a truck? I don't think it's here.
You're fine.
Maybe
Just
it is.
hold it closer.
Yeah.
There you go.
And we volunteered, because that sounded like the easier part of the whole project. But then they asked what your education was right away. Told them that, and then one of the questions on there was major things that you had in high school, and typing was it. We both had good education in typing, and the next morning when they came to get you to drive the truck, they took us over to the major military offices, and upstairs on the second floor they said, "This is where you'll be driving from." Showed us the typewriters, showed us all the applications for insurance for everybody in our division, and while the rest was down driving the trucks and marching around, we were sitting up there filling out all these insurance forms because we could type. Yeah.
So you hear stories about guys going into the service today when they meet the guys that are going to train them, the sergeants or whatever, and they're pretty rough. What was it like when you first got there? Was it kind of rough? Were they pretty strict, or what were the guys that trained you like?
Well, basic training for me was we had a upper class and a lower class, and whenever one of the upperclassmen wanted something done, they called one of us, and of course they'd put you in a brace, which was mean tension, you know, and you had to satisfy them, and they would, if you laughed or anything like that, you had to do push-ups or something. And I was always laughing at most of them, so I got a lot of extra punishment. And of course, we finally got our turn too, afterwards. But we made friends real quick, and there was always your bunkmate or whatever, and you got pretty close to people, and made it able to get through it anyhow.
What was yours like, Keith? How was your basic training? What was that like? What were your commanders like? What was that experience like?
Oh, the commander was pretty decent. He stayed away and left most of the work to his subordinates as far as boot camp was concerned. I remember that one of the things that happened to us in boot camp was we got in our uniforms, we got a brand new pair of Florsheim shoes. And the first thing they did was resole them so we could march. And that was basically what we did in the boot camp was marching and go to class, airplane identification, with swimming, wrestling, a lot of calisthenics. There was about seven weeks of the boot camp.
How about you, Dr. Morris? What was your boot camp experience like? What were your commanders like for you?
Actually, it was pretty humdrum from day to day with the marching and education that you were being prepared for, taken out. We never could. We had a chief that was handling all our division's things. His name was Anderson. Very nice guy. Never had any problems with him in anything about. Inspections were routine. What you didn't understand was why you had to hurry to get any place and then wait. And there was a lot of that took place. But other than that, it was pretty insignificant.
Now, the people that you met in your boot camp, your fellow soldiers, were there guys that you knew from home, from locally? Were there local guys that you didn't know from the area? And did you keep in touch with a lot of those guys? And do you still keep in touch with some today?
I never met anybody that, well, I met some later on, but at boot camp I didn't know anybody. And of course, I could say too that half of our time was picking up rocks in the marching area and all that. We seemed like we'd pick them up and they'd throw them back, or because all we done was pick up rocks for a long time. Anyhow.
Now, some of the things that you learned in boot camp, did you learn like how to take apart a rifle and put it back together and stuff like that?
We never had guns. We just was marching and parades, and that's about all I can remember. And the calisthenics was great.
Okay.
That's about it.
Okay. Did you know anybody in boot camp that was from close to where you grew up or lived? And did you keep in touch with those guys after the war?
Not from boot camp. Basically, I kept track of a lot of people when we were on the ship, and that was a long time later.
Okay. How about you, Dr. Morris?
I think we had one person from Delphus, Ohio, in our boot camp division. I did not know him personally, but I don't think I knew anybody when we got there.
Now, the people in your boot camp, did you keep together when you went into battle or on your ships, or did they split you up?
No, from boot camp I was assigned to an OGU unit, and from there I was sent to the University of Illinois for communication training. I was there for 14 weeks, 16 weeks I was there. Actually, my wife and I were married while we were there, and University of Illinois. But from there, I was designated to go to Shoemaker, California, which was another outgoing unit, and was there for 5 days, and then received orders to go down to Alameda, California, went aboard ship at that time. And the second day on the ship, I found out that there was a number of Ohioans there. We had a young man from Bowling Green by the name of Miller. We had a young man from North Baltimore by the name of Ferguson. We had a knifer from Oregon, Ohio, and they were all signalmen. And I hadn't seen or known of any of them before I got there.
Okay. Did you keep in touch with any of those guys after the war?
Just two of them. I kept in touch with Miller, who became an announcer for University of Illinois football teams, and he stayed there quite a while, and I was there with him. Knifer, I had one occasion to meet him. He came to our office in Delphus with a back injury, and that was the only time that I had any contact with any of them.
So when he showed up at your office, did he know that was you that was there, or was it just a real big coincidence?
I really don't know that for sure, no.
So after basic training was finished, what was your next step? Where did you go, and what did you do after that? What was your training after basic training?
Well, I went to Muskogee, Oklahoma to learn to fly PT-19 as a little airplane. Spent 3 months there, and I went to Coffeyville, Kansas for my basic, Coffeyville for my basic training, which is a little bit more horsepower. And then I went to Aldous, Oklahoma, where Bob Bentley from Delphus was my instructor. He had seen the roster of the incoming class, and so he seen somebody was coming in from Ottoville. We didn't know each other, but he made sure that I got in his class. So Bob was a great instructor, and he taught me twin engines mostly. So then I was. By the time I finished those three, I graduated and got my pilot's wings and got to go home on leave for 2 weeks.
Okay. So did you learn how to fly more than one plane down there?
Well, every place you went was a different plane, yes, with more horsepower and a bigger plane generally.
So you learned how to fly the fighter planes and also the bombers?
Yeah.
Okay.
After I got off my leave, then they sent me to Fort Worth to learn to fly the B-24. And so I spent 3 months there, and then I had to pick up a crew and go to March Field for another 3 months to train the crew, and then we were ready to go overseas after that was done.
So Keith, what did you do after basic training? Where did you go, and what was your next step?
Basic step after that was going back to Great Lakes again, and that's when we had the opportunity to get into a trade school of one kind or another. And as I mentioned before, I wanted to be a radioman, but my mechanical aptitude leaned towards being a torpedoman. And spent 16 weeks, I think it was, in torpedo school. There were about 30 of us in that class. And at the end of the time, depending on how our grade standing was, we could gain a rank. When you go into basic training in the Navy, you're an apprentice seaman. When you come out of that, you're a first class seaman, or second class. Yeah, second class. And then after that, the new graduate is the first class. But the top three candidates in the torpedo school would get a petty officer rank, and I was able to get that. So I was a third class petty officer when I got out of torpedo school.
What was torpedo school like? What was your day like? What did you learn? What did you do?
The torpedo's a rather complicated machine, if you will. It's something that is part of a war, but it's something that has to be fine-tuned. Torpedo is made up of three parts. There's the back part is the engine, the middle part is the air flask, and the nose is the TNT. We had to learn to do all of those, be able to take them apart and fix them and maintain them, and then when we're on ship.
Earl, what did you do after basic training? Where did you go? What was your next step as well?
Well, I think I just reiterated a part of that when we went to University of Illinois for training, and then Shoemaker, California, Alameda, and aboard ship. And from there, it was mostly unknown where you were going and what was going to be happening. But our air crews, we never had them with us for coming into port. They flew them off the ship, and they would go into Pearl Harbor, or maybe into San Francisco. And when you left, you would go out, and then the air crews would fly out and land on the ship afterwards. That was mostly the way that happened. But like it was 5.5 days from San Francisco to Pearl Harbor. We made that trip probably 8 or 9 times. And Pearl Harbor to Guam, which we did frequently because we would take air crews to Guam and then bring back damaged aircraft that were ones that could go in and be repaired and put back into use for purposes. And the launching of aircraft and landing of aircraft was always exciting, but that was maybe a 2 or 3 hour program, and then from there on it was dull. dull. But for somehow the commander assigned me to the new inductees coming on board, and I had the responsibility of training 5 of those guys, semaphore, light, and Morse code for 3 months. And then I got out of that responsibility. One of the incidents that where I was really, really scared was, I don't know if you understand what general quarters is. That's when you go into an area of, Keith knows about this, you get into an area of where there's battles, submarines, foreign aircraft, so forth. And probably not many of you had the opportunity to see the ocean when it was like glass. You ever see that, Keith? Yeah. You could see, it looked like you could step off the ship and walk anywhere because it was so still and quiet. It was just like this tabletop glass. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, our sonar picked up a signal, and that's the way the ocean was at that time. Just, you could see for 5 miles and there wasn't a ripple anyplace. And of course they sounded general quarters, not knowing what this was. And my position on general quarters was at a 20 millimeter aircraft gun, and you went to your position, you were strapped into the gun and stayed there until general quarters was over, of course. 5 o'clock came, no identification. They wouldn't respond to radio calls, nothing. They had a aircraft that came in from, I think it came from Guam, and circled around. They said no identification could be made, but the sonar was still reporting that this unknown craft was still there. We went into a zigzag course to break our line of travel. Nothing had happened. 6, 7, 8 hours went by. 5 o'clock in the morning, it disappeared with no contact for us. But I'm still strapped in that lousy 20 millimeter gun. And at the end of general quarters, they found out through a lot of investigation after that it was the ocean's fault, because it was so quiet and so flat and so nothing moving anywhere except the wake of our ship, which was about 400 yards behind us. And our radar picked up the wake of our ship and followed us all night long. And not a lot of fun. It's funny now, but not a lot of fun at that time. Yeah. Another incident, of course, was when, after the Battle of Leyte Gulf, which was prior to just the big bombs dropping, we pulled into Philippines with our ship, and we had Liberty, and I was on a ball team, and I was over on an island. We was playing ball against some other aircraft carrier, and came back to the ship, and there was an LST had come in and not too far from us. And when I came back aboard ship, my brother was waiting there. He was on that LST. Had permission from our captain to come aboard and spend some time with us. Very, very exciting there. Yeah.
Now, you were a signalman. What did that entail? What was your job on the ship as a signalman?
What did I do as a signalman?
Mm-hmm.
You sent and received messages that you were directed to. Biggest part of our activity was when we was coming into port or leaving port. We had a lot of messages to send either to the island that we were going to or to other ships. We generally had a destroyer escort with us, and there was a lot of contact between where we were at and where they were at. And oddly enough, when we thought we were going to get torpedoed, it's the only time we didn't have a destroyer escort with us. Anyway, but that was exciting. We lost a lot of aircraft. We only ever lost 2 pilots, but we lost a lot of aircraft in landing and taking off. Just, yeah.
Okay, Ralph, when did you deploy overseas? How did you get there, and what was that trip like for you?
Well, after I trained my crew, we at March Field I finished, and they put us aboard a troop train. And of course, before they left, they gave us a .45 caliber gun. We strapped on our side, and we looked pretty wicked traveling across the country with a gun strapped on, but I'd never seen a bullet. So it wasn't doing me much good. And then later on, they took the guns away from everybody because you were better off being captured if you had to bail out than have a gun on you, because the Germans, if you had a gun, they were going to shoot you. So they took the guns away. But we went on aboard the troop train, and there was, I suppose, 8 or 10 cars full of airmen headed for Boston. We come through Delphus here, and I was hoping to see somebody I knew, but I didn't. So we got to Lima. They had a U.S. over there you could get a free cup of coffee and donut. So the whole train stopped and they all got out. And during this process, my co-pilot and I were walking past the engine looking it over, you know, and the engineer hollered at me and he says, "Hey, you want to ride up here?" And I said, "Well, sure." So we jumped up in the cab of the engine, and he let us sit on his lap after we got started. Of course, our guys back in the car thought we went AWOL, you know. And anyhow, we got to ride in that engine, and which was really something. They had all kind of friends along the track. He'd blow the whistle at, and he said, "There's a boy in there or something with paralyzed. He's in a wheelchair or something." And there's all kind of things like that. And you remember how trains gathered, or steam engines got water from the old tank and the nozzle. Well, the engineer said, "Look up there." And here it looks like a streak of silver down the middle of the track. And here it's a trough, maybe that wide, and I don't know how deep. But they says, "We're going to take on water." So they're driving, we're going 40, 50 mile an hour, whatever. They drop a scoop into that trough, and that water flew back to the tender back behind the engine. And he says, "You're going to watch, you're going to see some water in a little bit." So I thought that was interesting, how they changed from the nozzle to picking it up on the fly. And anyhow, we got to ride that engine to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And of course, then we went back with our guys, and I don't remember much of the conversation, but they thought we had left the train. So we got to Boston, and then we got on the New Amsterdam. There was 10,000 troops. On D-Day, we boarded the New Amsterdam and left the port on D-Day. And we went by ourselves because that was the size of the QE2, and we could go faster than any sub. So we zigzagged across the Atlantic Ocean and I think it took us 5 days. And I landed in Liverpool, and then was sent to Metfield, my base that I first went to.
Okay. Was that the first time you had been on a ship like that?
I think so.
Okay. Was it pretty crowded?
Yeah, it was. We run into some terrible, I don't know, was it a big storm out there anyhow on that ship. In fact, one day my co-pilot and I were the only two guys that ate. The rest were sick, and the crew asked me to come down to show me where they were. I had a nice cabin up on either second deck or first deck, I'm not sure. But we had a real nice quarters. Anyhow, I go down and they showed me where they were sleeping, and there was vomit when the ship swung back and forth. Them poor guys, they left them out of the bottom every once in a while to get clean up. But everybody got sick, and everybody but us too, I think. But anyhow, that was my trip over there.
Okay.
We were chased by a sub one time. They had us on alert, but we didn't see it or anything.
So were you part of a convoy that went over, or just by
No,
yourselves?
By ourselves.
Okay.
That was one of the few ships that could do that.
Right.
And you had to be able to outrun the stuff.
Keith, how about your experience after basic training? Where did you go, and where did you first go overseas or hit the actual war?
Well, I mentioned to you earlier about going down to Chickasaw, Alabama to pick up a new destroyer. I think I'd like to tell you a little bit about what a destroyer is. It's a ship that's 375 feet long, just a little longer than a football field. It's about 60 feet wide. It has no armament. It's built to go fast. And it has a lot of, I said that wrong. It has no armor, but it has a lot of armament. It has 5-inch guns, 40-inch guns, 20 millimeter guns, and it has a crew made up of different classes of sailors that had different training. We've got gunner's mates, torpedomen, fire control. These are the guys that aim the guns, not for fire control purposes. They aim the guns. You have deckhands, and the ship is basically made up into two parts because of damage that can happen in war. It has a forward engine room and an aft engine room, a forward fire room and an aft fire room. Those are both in the center of the ship. The sleeping quarters are in the forward and the aft portions, and the crews of each one, the gunners, mates, torpedomen, and so on, are split up. So half the crew is in the front of the ship and half is in the back of the ship. So if part of the ship is damaged, part of the crew will still be able to maybe carry on. In jobs that the destroyer has, one of them is plane guard that Earl talked about, and when his ship was in use, the planes were protecting us when we were bothered by kamikazes.
So did you travel in groups of ships quite a bit when you traveled, or you simply were protecting other ships, or what was your daily routine like?
Well, let me carry on the next section here. Where first, after we got a brand new ship, we go on what is called a shakedown. Our shakedown cruise, we traveled to Bermuda. And during a shakedown cruise, it gives the ship the chance to try out everything that is on the ship. The fire control system, the guns, the torpedoes. There are 10 torpedoes on the ship, 2 mounts each with 5 torpedoes. And we can take off that TNT and put an air flask on the front of the torpedo so that after it's fired and it runs its course, that flask blows the water out, puts the air in, and it'll pop up like a cork. Then we can go pick it up again.
So how long did the shakedown last?
Shakedown lasted about 4 weeks. Not too long. They didn't give us too long. We went from Bermuda. We came back to Charleston then, which was our home port, and we made some more practice runs from there, trying out the guns and the torpedoes, and we made a short trip to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where we picked up new torpedoes to take with us when we went back over to the Pacific. From Charleston then, which was our home port, we went down through the Panama Canal and to the West Coast and up to San Diego. And then from there we went to Pearl Harbor. And from there we escorted troop ships from there to Eniwetok and then on out to Guam and Saipan.
What was it like going through the Panama Canal?
Say again?
What was it like going through the Panama Canal?
It was fun. There's a big lake in the middle of the Panama that's called Gatun Lake, and it's the lake that feeds the two locks, or the series of locks, really that enable you to get through the canal, and it's fresh water. When the ship is on the sea, you get salt water all the time. It's all over the ship from the spray. But when you go through Gatun Lake, all the fire hoses come out and we wash her all down.
Okay, Earl, what was your experience like when you first got into the actual war? Maybe not into combat, but where you first started doing that work?
Our first really application to the war was getting troop ships at Saipan and taking them up to Iwo Jima. That was where we first got actual combat. We were part of a force that came in on the southwest side and made a fake landing, so that when we did come in on the southeast side, we'd have less opposition from the Japs. That was the first we had contact with the war.
Okay. Earl, how was your experience when you first got into the actual war?
Well, our ship rarely got that close to it, but we did have aircraft that would maybe go out 200 miles or so, and fortunately we didn't lose them there. We lost them on launches and landings. One of the most significant things, and I often thought that it should be written up or maybe a whole book done on it. We were in a group, 16 or 17 aircraft, and I don't know, we had destroyers, and it was just before the big battle at Leyte Gulf. A TBM, the Lexington, called and said that they had launched a TBM and it had crashed in the water, said the crew needed to be picked up. TBMs are torpedo bombers. They have a 3-man crew, a pilot, a radioman, and a gunner. Our escort destroyer, excuse me, my voice is a little raspy here. Our escort destroyer picked that crew up out of the water, brought it around, transferred that group to our ship. And shortly after they were notified that they had been picked up and the crew was fine, they radioed back and said, "We need the crew. You got to find a way to get them back over to the Lexington." So they decided they took the torpedoes out of a torpedo bomber, because there was one there. They put the crew in the torpedo pit under the bomber. Now, the sea went from glass to pretty pitchy and everything. So when you're launching an aircraft, I don't know all the technicalities, but you got to get it so that the bow of the ship is coming up and you're into the wind, and the aircraft coming down the flight deck has got to be in such a position that when he gets to the front, the ship should be like this, and the plane should be there, which gives them enough lift to get off. Well, they did, and the ship went down, and they ditched another TBM. Now, they got our flight crew, they got the Lexington's flight crew, and that destroyer come around, picked all 6 of those guys up and brought them back to our ship and transferred them over, put them in another TBM, and flew them back to the Lexington. Now, I think that was the most amazing, amazing feat that could happen to just.
You said that most of the plane damage on with your ship was landing and taking off. What kind of problems did they have, or what made them have such problems?
Well, atmospheric conditions had a lot to do with flight from an aircraft carrier. I needed to have at least a 30-mile-an-hour wind. A ship had to be headed into the wind, and they had to get the pitch of the ship that was going with the aircraft that was taking off. If we catapulted those planes off, it was not that bad because they catapult them at 80 miles an hour. You go from standing 90 feet, 80 miles an hour. But when they flew them off, lots of problems. When, we lost one plane over the side, pilot coming into land. We had just come through a little rain squall. The flight deck was wet. He came down perfect pitch. Tail hook caught the steel cable, flipped him sideways, and it scooted him sideways right off the ship. And the plane was sitting there tipping just like this, and everybody's screaming for the pilot to get out, And finally he realized his position. He jumped up, stepped out on the wing, jumped off on the flight deck, and the plane rolled off into the water. So another, as I said, the takeoffs and landings were exciting.
Did they use the catapult all the time, or did they just sometimes?
Just sometimes.
Okay.
If you couldn't get enough wind, then they used a catapult.
You said your ship was less than 500 feet long.
495 feet long.
So that's not a very long runway.
No, that landing field is awful small. Yeah, 111 feet wide, 495 feet long. We had, do you want to hear another story?
Sure, go ahead.
The captain's gig, which is like a small motorboat, is hoisted up on the port side of the ship up there. And when you're in port, the captain usually takes this from one position to another, whatever. And it goes through a service thing when it brings back the ship. We're out at sea, and the mechanic who was assigned to take care of his gig was, and this was one of those, another one of, you don't see a lot of them, but this was another ocean flat as can be, no waves, nothing anywhere, but we did have the balance coming through. He was coming back from servicing that rowboat or whatever it was, and he was coming up the ladder. As the ship rolled away like that, he was carrying his equipment in his hand. He reached for the next step. The ship rolled away. He fell off backwards into the ocean. And of course, there was a lot of excitement right away. We were in a bad zone. He couldn't swim. He floated on his back till we lowered another boat, and he was out there, and they went out and picked him up and brought him back, and of course it was all safe. But he was in the water about 25 minutes, could not swim. He just floated. Of course, it's easier to float in salt water than it is in a swimming pool. But another exciting half hour of
So guys in the Navy on ships didn't have to know how to swim, or they weren't taught how to swim?
Well, they were supposed to know how to swim.
Okay. You just
There's another story about that. too.
We'll get to that here shortly. Ralph, when you got to Europe, did you know you were going to fly bombers right away, or is that the first thing you did?
Oh, yes, we were one of the first replacements to replace the crews that had finished their 25 missions. So anyhow, the first 2 weeks they sent us to Scotland to train us about trying to escape, and they took our pictures. They made us dress in old ragged clothes and took our pictures. I looked like a poor guy off the street, and to fake a passport for you in case if you could get to the underground, they could make you a passport. Just that kind of training. Then we went back to Metfield, and one of the first things that happened, my co-pilot and I went to the officer club. I don't know what we'd go there for. Anyhow, all at once all hell broke loose, and I dove under the bar, and I don't know where Roy went, but we stood there a while, and everything quieted down. They had told me that German ships had come across and followed the airplanes in their landing pattern at Metfield, but I never seen any of that. But anyhow, I thought they were bombing us, or either that or a buzz bomb. Anyhow, we found out that they made a new kind of bomb that exploded with a bump. And it was about noon, and all the guys that helped unload it, 5 trucks come in with bombs. And they wanted to unload, and they were in a hurry. I think it was I don't know if it was a Saturday night or something. Anyhow, they were in a hurry to get unloaded, and there wasn't nobody to unload them because it had been right at dinner time. Well, they just opened the tailgates and drove ahead, and then put it in reverse and backed and put it on the brakes and threw them off. Well, this new kind of dynamite, RDX, I think he called it, or something. I don't know what it was anymore, but that exploded. They never found anything of them 5 guys. It destroyed 24 of our airplanes, and we had to move to another new base. So we moved to North Pickingham, and that's where I made most of my missions, and out of North Pickingham. But my first bad mission was, my first mission was as a co-pilot to indoctrinate me to find out what it was like. And so I flew co-pilot on my first mission to Munich, which was probably 9 or 10 hours, and it wasn't too bad a mission, and we got along all right, got home all right, and then later on, I don't know if you remember how St. Lo was. St. Lo was a bed for our ground troops, and they were tied down and couldn't move, so they decided we'd drop right ahead of them. Well, we were supposed to drop at 13,000 feet, which is really low, and they were hitting us with all kind of guns, and the guy beside of me got shot down. My regular bombardier was in that airplane, and he got shot down, and but he would never talk to his wife or me or anybody about his being prisoner. he never would talk to anybody. And anyhow, I was flying next to him, and we were supposed to drop beyond a red stripe, red smoke. And of course, I think the wind changed, and we decided not to drop. So we pulled back up and went back to England, and hadn't dropped our bombs. And on the way back, I started losing oil on 3 engines. And I called, and I told him I wanted to go drop my bombs in the channel. And they said, well, you can't, there's too many of our ships out there. So I said, well, wasn't nothing I could do. So I found out then that my radio compass, which pointed to home, wouldn't work either. So we had 10,000 feet of cloud below us. And the guy that I flew with on my first mission, he says, well, stick on me, Ralph, I'll take you down. And I glued myself to him. I did lose him once or twice. And when I broke out about 500 feet, my runway was right in front of me. All I had to do was get the gear down and set it down. But that was one of the scariest missions I had. But
When you went on a mission, how many planes went? Were there escort planes that protected you guys?
well, we had 27 in our group. We flew 9 high and 9 in the middle and 9 lower.
That was 27 bombers?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was just our group. And then, of course, when we went on a mission, there were so many airfields in England that you couldn't just take off and go a certain direction. You had to take off and then fly so many minutes at so many degrees, and until you broke out of the clouds, and then you could see. But there was every once in a while somebody'd crash, hit somebody that wasn't in the right pattern. So, but anyhow, we managed that pretty well, and we'd get 1,000 planes up there in just a small area, and they had to do it in a short time. And we had one airplane that had polka dots, all colored polka dots all over, and that was our forming plane. We could see that one and pick it out, and we formed our 27 planes where we belonged on there. And that's the way we'd go over to Europe. And there was only one time there was so many clouds that we went up to 26,000 feet, which a B-24 ain't supposed to fly that high, but it was 65 degrees up, minus 65 up there. And we managed that all right. And if you remember when the paratroopers landed at Arnhem, and they run out of medical supplies and everything almost. And we practiced in England for 3 days to see how low we could fly. Guys come back with chickens in their engines and stuff like that. Anyhow, they said that cows didn't give milk for 3 days. Anyhow, I was leading the low squadron, and on the way over, I thought I was flying in the channel, and of course there was somebody below me yet, and I finally called the leader, and I says, pull up a little bit. I said, we're dragging our feet in the water, and so he did, and we went to drop our supplies, and we went past windmills into Holland, and they were shooting at us, and we weren't allowed to shoot for some reason. And anyhow, after we had a guy along that took care of the shoving the stuff out of the airplane, a loadsman or somebody he done the unloading. They just shoved it out down the what do you call it? Down to Bombay, so out to Bombay. Anyhow, when I don't get too much time flying to look around, but I seen it looked like to me a 20-acre field maybe, and all I could see was C-47s, the tow planes piled up just all over, all directions, and I don't know how anybody survived that paratroopers, you know. Anyhow, we dropped the supplies, and on the way back, we left the target, and somebody calls me and says I was on fire, and so I feathered my #2 engine, and I beat the rest of the crew home. I just found out that they'd hit an oil line, and oil was burning through the engine some way. So, but 3 engines took me home just fine. That's about the main things.
Now, you mentioned at one time that you were on a mission where there were 1,000 planes in the sky.
Oh, yeah.
What does that look like? I can't imagine.
Oh, well, you don't get to see only about 100 maybe, and they just, everything goes by time. The leader takes off first, and whoever's leading the group or the whole 8th Air Force, and you make enough. When there's vapor trail, you make enough vapor trails that you can't see much back there. So but they're strung out, you know. And one time I didn't fly one time. This is towards the end of the war, really, too. And Germany could maybe only get enough planes together or gas to attack once during a day or something like that. Anyhow, they attacked our group when I wasn't flying with them, and they shot 17 of them 27 planes down. So I was lucky to be home.
Yeah.
But I always had a great love for Mary, the Blessed Virgin, and I prayed nearly continually, and I think she saved my life many times. Thank you.
Keith, what kind of ship did you serve on? Describe its purpose. What was your job, and what kind of combat did you get involved in?
I guess we need to give it a little background there. The states were trying to get some location closer to Japan so that there was some place for their bombers to return to. They were flying from Tinian and Guam up to Japan, and that's a long distance. And if a plane was hit and couldn't get back to base, he would either have to ditch, or else he'd have to have someplace else to land. Iwo Jima was their first choice. It was a small island, only about 4 miles long by about 2 miles wide. It had one landing field on it, and the first opportunity we had to find a place for those planes was to get Iwo Jima. It wasn't too much of a difficulty for us to handle that one, because mainly our job was to take loaded troop ships back from Tinian up to Guam for the invasion, and then take the empty ships back and bring it loaded up again. We did spend some time around Iwo Jima, firing barrages on the beaches. The spotters would tell us where to shoot, and we would try to honor that. and we fired star shells sometimes so that the Japs couldn't sneak up on our armies in the nights.
Now, what are star shells?
A star shell is a 5-inch shell that's fired by a 5-inch gun. They have different kinds of shells that they can shoot, but a star shell will shoots a light up in the sky with a parachute, and it comes floating down slowly over the ground. But that was, and there were very few kamikaze planes that were trying to hamper our fighting forces there. So that was the less of a problem for us. Well, whenever we did get close to land or close to the action, we had to go to general quarters. And that was not too difficult. The big problem with the kamikazes and the action came when we got into Iwo Jima. Get that? Iwo Jima. Let's see. Iwo Jima's landing began on February the 19th and lasted about to the end of March. It was a whole lot more difficult than our troops expected when they got there, because the Japs were really dug in. It's a volcanic island, and the Japs had it just honeycombed with caves. They go back into the caves when the ships would fire their barrages, and then they come out. The Japs had changed their warfare tactics a little bit. Used to be when they were down in Kwajalein and some of those places, they would meet the army on the beach, but when they got up to Okinawa, they'd stay back away so we could land on the beach. But then all heck broke loose whenever the Japs come out of those caves. On April the 1st, that was when we made the invasion of Okinawa. Our military was concerned about trying to protect our fighting forces on the islands, and they knew that Japan was coming on strong with these kamikazes. Kamikazes were the tail end of Japan's supply of airplanes. They had pilots that were sworn to go one way on those trips. They'd have a bomb on that plane, enough gasoline to take it one way, and the Japs would try to fly the plane into our ships. At Okinawa, it was very difficult to combat this. To do that, the military set up radar picket stations. There were 16 of them around Okinawa. The picket station was made up of 2 destroyers and 3 landing craft, and they would station themselves about 70 miles out away from the islands, circle the whole island. And when the Japs plane come in, the destroyers were supposed to intercept them with their radar and help the Marines air squad in the air try to help down those planes. There were times when one plane had come in and a ship could knock it down, but there were times when 3 or 4 planes would come in aiming at one destroyer, and they didn't have a chance. There were 15 destroyers that were sunk by planes. There was another 13 of them that were hit so badly that they couldn't be repaired, and they were scrapped. And there were another 44 ships that were damaged so badly that they were taken out of service and they couldn't be used anymore. They had to go back home later on to be repaired. There were a few of our ships, and mine was one of them, that got through all of that without getting hit. We were on radar picket duty for 63 days. We would be on a picket line for about 5 days, 6 days, and then we would be sent back to Karamaretto, which was an island just south of Okinawa, to get more food and more ammunition. Sometimes we didn't always get the food. There were times when on the ship we had dehydrated potatoes, dehydrated milk, dehydrated flour, and there were times when the bakers would take that flour and bake bread, and there would be bugs in it. We would, for a while there, we would pick the bugs out, but then we would say, "What the heck?" But we, as I say, we spent 63 days on that picket duty before the kamikazes had slowed down, and we were able to take a R&R back to Luzon, like the lady back to the Philippines, and we took empty ships back there with us.
Okay, thank you. Earl, describe your ship and what was its purpose? What was its job to do during the war? How many guys were there? What kind of armaments and armor you had?
For after service, you mean?
Well, what did your ship do during the war on a daily basis? And what was its purpose in the battles?
You had calisthenics every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day. I wanted to ask Keith, I wanted to ask Keith, didn't you think it was kind of strange that they never gave those kamikaze pilots medals for 5 missions or more?
I think they gave him a drink of sake before they took off.
Yeah. It was pretty much routine. Everything was set out for you to do, and what divisions and where they were at, and so forth. And they would almost all day long. You could see certain divisions up on the flight deck doing calisthenics or running from one end of the ship to the other, because there was not hardly any place to go.
How many guys were on your ship?
We had a complement of 900, I believe. No, I'm not sure. There was under 1,000. With the flight crews, when we had flight crews aboard and everything, it would go up 40, 50. But otherwise, the ship was. What did I say, 495 feet long and 111 feet wide.
That's a lot of guys crammed into a pretty small space.
Yeah, but during that time, there was times when a lot of those guys that were on afternoon shifts, midnight shifts, they would be sleeping during the day. Some of them were lucky enough to miss those calisthenic programs. This is sleep time. But coming into ports, coming into various areas where that you would have to anchor out 400 or 500 yards, couldn't get close enough to do anything. Everything, we had a lot of things that were airlifted off of the ship onto the islands, and a lot of things, just ammunition, we'd take on ammunition for aircrafts, and refueling was always an exciting thing that was going on. They have they were as large as, I don't know what they were called anymore, but they were as large as a destroyer. They'd come alongside and you have to drag all those hoses from one ship to the other, and then they pump the fuel for the aircraft and the fuel for your own ship over.
So your ship was kind of like a supply type of ship? You would get things for other ships that were part of the force?
Yeah, well, it was like, there's one time, I think, 7 months we never saw land. Everything was brought on, take off, out at sea, like that. And my wife used to say, well, I never got a letter for so long, and I wrote one every day. But no way of getting it off the ship or getting it on the ship. I didn't get her mail either. But that's the way it was. Pretty much everything routine, unless something took place that diverted you from that program. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned the guys that were on the ship were supposed to know how to swim. So you said there was another story for that?
Well, back in boot camp, you're probably all familiar with how long an Olympic pool is. The object of you jump in the pool with your clothes on, which slows you to swimming down a little bit. So you had to complete swimming the length of the pool and get out, and the officers were all there, take your name down, so forth and so on. My brother and I jumped in at the same time. 3/4 across the pool, I know I'm not going to make it. So I just swam over the side and got out and walked around and waited for him to finish swimming. He was really fatigued. He came out of the water right in front of the officer sitting there. He said, "What's your name?" He said, "Morris." And looked around at me and he said, "What's your name?" I said, "Morris." He said, "You got a first name?" I said, "Earl." He said, "Very good, you're okay." He said, "What's your name?" He said, "Burl." He said, "You have to sign up for swimming lessons." He hated me for that. But
Did you know how to swim before you went into the
No.
service? Okay.
No, did not. And that almost cost me my life by not being able to swim that well, because in Guadalcanal, we all had swimming. You jump off. I was late getting there because they would jump off the sponson ship into the ocean, swim around, go around the front of the ship, and go up the ladder back on. Well, I was late getting there, so when I got into this, went up the sponson, jumped off into the water. It's about 25 feet from the sponson deck to the water. Go down and I looked for the raft that takes you back. They were going around the end of the ship. Well, I can't swim. All I can do is dog paddle. There was a line from the sponson down probably twice the size of my thumb. It was fastened at the top, and I managed to get to that line, got it around my waist, and I inched myself up on that line 4 or 5 inches at a time and tightened up the rope, 4 or 5 inches at a time, tighten up the rope. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here today. Just one of those sad things that if I could swim, I'd have made it. But I didn't. Just,
You mentioned letters to and from your wife. How often did you get mail? I mean, What was your thoughts on when the mail came?
You might get mail once a month and maybe once every 2 months, but it came by ship. They brought another ship would bring it out, pick up what we had to go back. Some small packages they would take, nothing more than that. But I would get letters from her maybe 14, 15, 16 at a time, and sometimes it'd be 3-4 days dated in between, so you know how long it took, at least 30 days to get back. But wasn't only me, everybody else was the same way, except the commander. He had his own little plane on ship, and if it was in 200 miles of a landing field on an island somewhere, you'd see his little Piper Cub take off, and he'd be back the next day. But he had privileges that the peons weren't allowed to have. Hawkins was his name. We had a good group of officers on our ship, except for Hawkins. He was not kind to anybody.
So was Mail Day a big day on the ship when mail came in?
Can I mention one other thing?
Sure, go ahead, Keith.
You know, whenever there are any battles or any problems in a war like that, usually the deaths are less than the casualties. On this Okinawa thing, there's a lot of guys below deck on ships, and when they came to summing up the casualties and deaths on Okinawa for the Navy, there were more deaths than the casualties.
Okay, and how about you? Letters from home. What was it like to get a letter from home?
What it was like?
What was it like to get a letter from home? Yeah.
I don't remember any special excitement about it. But they did come there eventually when we got alongside another big ship that had carried mail, or we got into port.
How about you, Ralph? What were letters from home like for you?
My wife and I, both of us, would try to get a letter out every day. But I got mail pretty regular and from a lot of friends, and mail was no problem with us. Of course, being in England, and it wasn't that big a deal. So.
Now, when you signed up to be a bomber pilot, how many missions did they say you would have to do before you were done?
First they said 25, and that's what it was when I got over there. But when I forget the dates, anyhow, when I forgot what was that.
So did that number go up as the war went on?
Yeah. And when I got close to 25, they said it's 30. And then when I got close to 30, they said 35. And that was the same thing with when I got my DFC. I was 1 day short of something I was supposed to have, and I didn't. And that's why a couple generals and a couple of my friends from California, they made sure that I got my DFC. And
Now, what's a DFC?
the Distinguished Flying Cross. And that was, the pictures of that back in there.
I think you got that, about 5 or 6 years ago?
10, yeah, it was
10 years ago?
60 years late.
Yep. Okay. Well, at least you did get it. As the war went on, how did your bombing missions change? Were they a little bit different as the enemy was less powerful, or?
Well, we had less and less fighters. That's the reason they increased they said you wasn't in the danger, because when we first got there, I forget what, every 7 out of 10 guys weren't going to make it or something like that. But it got better, and I only seen fighters maybe. Of course, I missed some of them, but I seen one jet one time, and that was pretty close to the end of my missions. And other than that, they got less and less. They didn't have the fuel, or we had the P-51 that first could only go part way, and that they originally, the fighters, German fighters, would wait until the P-51s went home, then they attacked the bomber. And of course, we always was noted for flying a tight formation, and of course they wouldn't pick on us. They'd pick some group that wasn't flying so close. And we always had the record of flying really close. And it got less and less, and finally, toward the last, well, other than the time they massed this whole bunch and got that 17 of our planes away. That was about their last breath, you know. And
Now you did 35 missions. Were you finished at 35, or was that close enough to the end of the war that your flying days were done?
I finished that in early December of '44, and I was all done by the middle of December. So I went on leave to Scotland with my co-pilot, and then from there on, I went home, and they wanted me to fly the weather ship. Every day they sent a ship out to go about 400 miles northwest of England out over the North Sea to see what the weather was going to be by tomorrow morning. So you were supposed to fly out there and look the weather over. But I was never in love with the North Sea, because if you had problems, you landed in there, you had about 5 minutes to live. It was that cold. So I always liked to fly it when we was going on a mission, because we got away from the flak that way.
How many missions did you go on where you thought, I don't know if I'm coming back on this one? Were there a lot of times where there was heavy fighting?
Was what?
How many missions did you go on where you thought during the mission that, I don't know if I'm going to get back on this one, where there was a lot of heavy fighting?
Quite a few. It wasn't mostly flak was my biggest worry. I mean, you go to like Bremen or Munich or those places, they had thousands of guns. It looked like a Black Sea out there, and you say, there's no way I can get through there. But you would. I said, one time there was a shell or a hole behind my seat about that big around where one shell went clear through my airplane. But it didn't knock us down. But, there was always flak, and I come through sometimes 100 holes and sometimes 10 or sometimes 50, whatever. But nearly every mission I had a hole somewhere.
Okay. Keith, what were some of your closest calls where you were in battle and weren't sure what was going to happen?
What was your question?
What were some of your closest calls when you were on board your ship that you were in a battle or in danger, maybe from a kamikaze or somebody, where you thought, maybe I might not get through this?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean.
Were there times when you were in battle and you thought your ship might get sunk or hit or?
The one on my general quarters station was on the number 2 torpedo mount. There was a 5-inch gun right behind me, and I think that may have contributed to my current condition.
And you said that you were one of the few ships that never got hit by a kamikaze.
That's right.
Were there any close calls?
One guy I'm aware of got hit by a piece of shrapnel, but that's the extent of it. There are very few ships that didn't get hit.
I was going to say that's pretty lucky from the fighting that took place.
Yeah, there were 72 ships that got hit altogether, and of those, 15 of them were sunk, some within minutes, and the guys that were below decks didn't have a chance.
Earl, were there any close calls with your ship? Were you involved in much or any fighting?
Yeah, we had
Well, getting down to Earl there. We'll get back to you.
I was probably 150 miles was the closest one, and I think it was a Hancock that got hit and sank. There were 1,700 of their crew in the water. A lot of them were picked up. A lot of them didn't make it, but we were close enough that they transferred a lot of the ones that they picked up to our ship. And we had one, Tom Hennessy from New York. We became real good friends, and he was taken back to Pearl Harbor after his ship was sank, and then he requested to come on board to Nassau when he was reassigned, which he did, of course, became good friends. But he said that was, if there was any hell, he had his share of it when they got hit and the ship sank and floating around out there in water, but don't know if you're going to get saved, picked up, or what, because it took hours and hours to get all of them. But that's about as close as we were to any of them.
But you had a lot of experience with guys that had been shot down or planes that had been damaged or things like that at times.
Did I really? Or
Well, picking up guys that had been on sunken ships that had been hit and sunk.
my position of duty was on the bridge. I was on the bridge all the time. I knew most of the time about what was taking place and going on. Wasn't supposed to know, but you're that close to what's going on, you can't avoid it. But no, not a lot of them. We had aircrafts that came in. One came in on one wheel, landed. He was fine, but the aircraft was ruined, and so was two others that his plane hit when he landed. They were pretty much a group all their own. Not many of them too much older than I was, but they were 22, 23, 24 years old. These guys, a short amount of training. Most of them were trained in Florida at it was an air base down there. Had one of the landing strips at that air base was marked off just exactly like an aircraft carrier flight deck was, and that's where they trained. But they didn't train with the roll and everything, the pitch of the ship, and that's where they got in trouble. That's no way to train for every incident there is, just not.
Okay, I'll start with Ralph. On VE Day and VJ Day, which kind of signaled the end of the war, how soon or how did you hear about that, and what thoughts went through your mind?
On VE Day, I was out in California. There was not much made out of it at all. And I didn't have any thoughts because I got home in late January, and we got married in February. We had 2 weeks to make all our arrangements to get married, and we got married in February, and we went out to California, and I had 2 weeks, or we did 2 weeks at Santa Monica, where it was called R&R, where we were supposed to have rest and recuperation. Anyhow, they had food tables from here to the street out there. Just any kind of food you could think of. So we ate like kings for 2 weeks and walked along the beach, and then I went back to Marchfield, and I was going to I started training for V-29s to go to after the Japanese, but I never got that far. The war ended, and I got to come home.
Okay. Keith, how did you find out about VE and VJ Day, and what were your thoughts when you found out about that?
The atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima on August the 6th, and Nagasaki was dropped on August the 9th. About August the 15th, before anything there any response from Japan, on about the 15th, there was a false alarm let go in the harbor at Karamaretto, and all the ships started firing star shells and their guns, and it lasted for about 15 minutes. So they finally got it shut down and realized it was a false start. But it was a good thing that the Japs eventually did surrender. If we hadn't dropped the atomic bomb, so many more people would have been killed. While we were fighting in Okinawa, they were trying to judge about the invasion of Japan. They figured that if that invasion took off, there would be 70 million Japanese killed, because they would have fought to the last man, and they figured that we would have lost between 300 and 500,000 men if we would have had an invasion. So I don't know. A lot of people fault Truman for the decision he made, but I sure don't.
Okay, Earl, how did you find out about VE and VJ Day, and what thoughts went through your mind when you heard about those?
The European theater was winding down to the point where there's very little going on when we found out about it, and there was almost no excitement on the ship because we were coming close to being at the peak of this Pacific episode that went over there. But when it ended in VJ Day was August the 14th. And the actual signing of the armistice was August 26th or 27th, something like that. But the actual war ended on August 14th, and we always remembered that because our oldest son was born on August the 14th, and we have, that's like mine. I think I mentioned to you that how they celebrate my discharge from the Navy. Every year they have a massive celebration, or not too many of them know about it, but I was discharged December the 7th, 1945. So I claim that as my day, December the 7th. That's what got us in it, and that's when I got out of it. So, yeah, no, radio communication was the only way we found out about it. There was a lot of yelling and jumping up and down and everything, but no place to go and nothing to do. They did give every sailor and officer, and I'm sure the officers benefited more than anybody else did, they were allotted 2 cans of beer. I drank half of one of mine and threw it over the side and gave the other one away because I was not into alcohol, no way, at that time. So that's was the news that came through, was just on the radio.
Okay, and I'll start with Ralph also. When you got out of the war and came home, what was it like getting back to your hometown, your family, and seeing them again?
Oh, it was wonderful. But there's a couple of things I wanted to say.
Sure.
They were talking about how taken off from the carrier or someplace like that with an airplane. I knew a fellow here from Delphus that was a Navy pilot, and he never did see any combat, but he told me he crashed 7 planes during practice. So that was, but when I got home, we settled down, and our oldest son was on the way, and so we went back to our normal routine, and not much excitement. Oh, I could tell you this story about my neighbor. He was in the regular army. I don't know what he'd done, but he was talking about D-Day, and he said he had 7 boats sunk out from under him, just trying to get to shore. And we were in the Dewdrop Inn having a drink, and you know what the whiskey glasses were there? They were the small glass, and he was telling me about that, and he took that glass just like that and crushed it in his hand, telling me about D-Day. Poor guy.
Okay, Keith, what was it like when you finally got out of the service and got back home and saw your family?
After Okinawa was secured, we were attached to a task force with a couple of cruisers and some destroyers, and we were set to cruise along the China coastline all the way down to halfway down to the Philippines. And then we came back to Sasebo, Japan, and then on November the 17th, we left to come back to the States. We came back through the Philippines, San Diego, down around through the Panama Canal again, and back up to Charleston. By the time we got to Charleston, it was December the 23rd, and I applied for 30 days leave then, and I got it, and I got home Christmas Eve. That was a wonderful thing. First thing I did when we got back into Charleston, I took a car. A guy had a coach, whatever, and he drove me from Charleston to Philadelphia for $20, and then I caught the train there and came home, and I got home on Christmas Eve. It was raining and there was a storm that night. I called up my wife to come and get me, and her dad wouldn't let her drive the car because it was too rainy, too icy. So I took a cab, cost me $5 from Lima to Delphus, and then I met my future wife that evening, and I was home then for 30 days, and that was the end of everything.
How about you, Earl? What was your coming home experience like?
Well, our ship came into Alameda, California, but there was about half of them discharged and directed back to other entities. I was sent back to Shoemaker, California, that's where I was discharged, and of course my wife was in Oakland, California at the time, so we spent about five days there after the war, just celebrating and glad to see each other and so forth. And we came home to Ypsilanti, Michigan. That's where we come back to, as her home was there. Very, very tough times then, just really. there was a big transition taking place from manufacturing of all kinds of war equipment and subcontractors and so forth. They were automatically out of business right away. So this transition was taking place, and Ford Motor Company was on strike, Chrysler was out, General Motors was out. You couldn't get work. Everybody was trying to get work every place. So it took, I moved up step by step. I was always interested in trying to improve myself. I worked for Burroughs Adding Machine Company for 1 year. I had placed an application with the Detroit Police Department up there and was accepted on that, spent 3 years at that, and then I bought a business, a small business of my own, and worked at that for a long time, and had a illness that put me down for 6 months, fatigue and 16 hours a day and so forth. That's because I worked 1 day job and 1 night job. It was fun. We had a good time all the way getting to where we was at, and wound up going to Palmer Chiropractic College in 1950. And I'm here as a result. Yeah.
The last question that I have for you guys, if the one moment in the war that you remember the most or the most memorable, or a story that you have that always is the first thing that you think about. I'll start with you, Ralph. Yeah, big question.
Well, I don't have any regrets, or I don't really think about it that much. And, I don't. I always just went about my business, and I don't think it affected me very little.
Okay, all right. Okay, how about you, Keith?
I don't really remember anything specific about it. It was a wonderful adventure, but I don't want to do it again.
Okay. How about you, Earl?
The longer I've been away from it, the easier it was. And the experience was great. I would not want to go through it again. No.
Are there any questions? Anybody else have a question? Joanne? The question is about Dr. Earl's uniform, which is right behind him up here.
Yes, as a matter of fact, Joanne, that's responsible partly for you there. We lived on Cleveland Street when we came to Delphus for a long time, and then we built our new home on Lehman Road east of Delphus, and I never could find my uniforms. Didn't know what happened to them at all. And Joanne got in touch with me one day I think it was your daughter that bought that home, and they were going through a bunch of things up in the attic, and lo and behold, there was a box so big with my whites and my blues and everything. And many, many years it had been up there, and I was still looking for it.
Any other questions? We'll go with Renee. Oh. Yeah, John Peltier on the Arizona during Pearl Harbor, and he still remains entombed there today. Yeah. Yeah, the 75th anniversary of that battle or that attack is this December. And this museum and the Postal Museum will both have special exhibits commemorating the Second World War about that time. So watch for those. Renee?
I wanted to ask the two sailors here. When you were assigned a ship, is that the same ship you stayed on the whole time you were in?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah.
You stayed on the same
I
ship.
was on it from when it was commissioned in
What was your ship's name?
Van Valkenburg.
And yours was the Nassau. And you just stayed on that one the whole time?
Yeah.
It wasn't necessarily true, because they could transfer you.
But they didn't transfer me. The ship Van Valkenburg. Okay. The ship Van Valkenburg was named after the captain of the Arizona that was sunk at Pearl Harbor. But most of the guys on the ship were from Ohio, and most of us had gone to Great Lakes. We didn't all come from the same boot camp, but we came from Great Lakes. So most of the ship's reunions that we had have been in the eastern part of the United States.
And Earl, you could have been transferred, but you stayed on the same ship the entire war?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, right over here.
I was gonna ask the two sailors too. At the beginning, you were talking about the duties of your ships or whatever, and it was my understanding that your ship, Keith, was more of a destroyer type thing, shot those, whatever, and you didn't really have any protection on your ship, and then, is that right or no? Did I misunderstand?
I don't understand the question.
She's asking about your ship. It was
And then I-
to
because I was
shoot
thinking-
down things, but it didn't have a whole lot of protection. She was asking about that, the protection that your ship had, both armors and armaments.
There was no real protection.
Yeah, that's right.
My bunk was in the forward starboard portion of the ship, and right beside my bunk was about a three-quarter inch shell of steel, and that was all that was between me and the ocean.
I mean, it's for enemy fire, because I was kind of.
Your ship had guns, but it wasn't armored, correct? It didn't have a special armor as far as extra thick metal on the hull,
No.
but it did have gunships, and you could fire back and protect
We
yourself
had
that
guns.
way.
We had five 5-inch guns, and about six 40 millimeter stations, and there's about 10 20 millimeter guns. Oh yeah, we had, of course, in addition to the torpedoes, we had depth charges on the starboard and port sides, K-guns they called them, and then we had the big depth charges on the fantail, like the big barrels you roll off, you know. Yeah.
There
The
is.
rest of the question was, and then I thought I got from what Earl was saying, that his type of ship was out there that if somebody got in trouble, like an airplane or something else, then your job was more or less to help them out, give them relief, is that?
We had what was called a DE, a destroyer escort. It was a lot smaller than a destroyer, but they had guns and protection. Their primary purpose was if a ship is down, an aircraft goes down or somewhere, they can recover. But the bigger aircrafts, the Lexington and the Ticonderoga and those, they would have 4 and 5 destroyers or destroyer escorts traveling with them all the time for the same purposes, because they had a lot more, if they got hit and went down, they had a lot more problems than what we would have with our ship.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Lorraine.
Did Mr. Hay ever pilot the plane again after the war?
Have you flown a plane after the war?
Well, Bob Bentley and I, we went to Fort Wayne after the war, and we flew AT-6s. And he had no problem, but I was landing the plane like on top of this building, and I'd stall out and catch it again before it hit the ground. I was used to being ready 50 feet in the air instead of, I finally ground looped an AT-6, and they thought that I destroyed the world. So I thought, to hell with it, wasn't worth that. So we both quit yeah, we didn't do it very much. I always wanted to be what do you call it, commercial flyer, but that was so taken up with people. They said you had to know somebody. There was so many pilots free, and you couldn't get a job as a commercial pilot for nothing. So I give it up altogether.
Anyone else? Yes, back here. Yeah. What year did each one of you enter the service?
I went in October 2nd of 42 and got out in October of 45.
Okay, Keith. What year did you enter and end or leave the service? What years?
What year did I go in?
Yes.
November 43, and I was discharged in April of 46.
I went in September the 17th, 1943, and was discharged on December the 7th, 1945.
It kind of amazes me that these guys remember these exact dates so well. I have to write notes on my house for everything, and they remember these 70 years later. It's pretty awesome. Any other questions? Is there a Jello story?
Didn't think it was significant.
Well, we have time for a Jello story, so you're certainly welcome to tell it if you like.
Well, we had an accident. It was on board ship. A bomb went off, a small bomb went off, and destroyed the galley. And I don't remember exactly what it was, but somewhere between 13 and 15 days, we had nothing to eat but Jello. And because everything was contaminated, but
So can
that
you
was an unfortunate situation.
so can you still eat Jello today?
Yes, I can, but not a lot.
Any other questions today? Okay, I want to thank everyone for coming today. A great crowd today to hear these guys talk. They brought in some memorabilia, some pictures, some maps, some things over there on a few tables. Please enjoy those, and please come up afterwards, shake their hands, give them a pat on the back, take a selfie with them. Just introduce yourself to these great guys. So thank you again.